Hello and welcome to What the Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditis. Let's get to it. It's Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020. Welcome to day 1413. Donald Trump has discussed whether to grant preemptive pardons to Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Ivanka Trump, and Jared Kushner. While Trump Jr. was under investigation but never charged by Robert Mueller for his contacts with Russians offering damaging information on Hillary Clinton during the 2016 campaign, any potential criminal exposure of Eric Trump or Ivanka Trump remains unclear. Kushner, however, omitted several contacts with Russians during the campaign when he filled out a form for his White House security clearance. Trump has also discussed preemptively pardoning Rudy Giuliani. Meanwhile, the Justice Department is investigating a potential bribery-for-pardon scheme involving a large political contribution in exchange for a presidential pardon by the White House. Heavily redacted documents revealed that prosecutors were investigating whether two individuals approached senior White House officials as unregistered lobbyists and secretly lobbied or paid bribes to obtain a pardon for someone convicted of a federal crime. The documents show that a lawyer for a federal convict had discussions with the White House counsel's office about a pardon or commutation. The documents do not name Trump or the individuals involved, and they don't indicate if any White House officials had knowledge of the scheme. The status of the investigation remains unclear. In D.C., a government watchdog group sued Trump, Jared Kushner, and the White House to prevent them from deleting official emails and WhatsApp messages before they can be archived. The organization Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics allege that Trump and his administration are violating the Presidential Records Act by failing to correctly preserve records of official government business. Crew and other plaintiffs in the case also say that Trump has planned or executed destruction of records without notifying the archivists or Congress as required by law. Moving on, properties owned by the Trump Organization and Kushner Companies profited from coronavirus pandemic relief programs. This according to Paycheck Protection Program and Economic Injury Disaster Loan data that was released by the Small Business Administration. More than 25 PPP loans, totaling more than $3.65 million, were given to businesses with addresses at Trump and Kushner real estate properties, who pay rent to those owners. Of those, 15 properties reported that they only kept 1 job, 0 jobs, or did not report a number of jobs at all. More than half of the money from the Emergency Fund for Small Businesses went to 5% of the recipients. Meanwhile, the director of the CDC warned that this winter may be, quote, the most difficult time in the public health history of this nation, end quote. Dr. Robert Redfield predicted that December and January and February are going to be rough times, and the total deaths from COVID-19 could reach close to 450,000 by February unless a large percentage of Americans embrace social distancing and mitigation strategies, such as mask wearing. The number of COVID-19 patients in U.S. hospitals is currently at an all-time high, and the U.S. is currently averaging 161,448 new cases per day over the last week, roughly 2.5 times the July peak. The White House Coronavirus Task Force warned that we are, quote, in a very dangerous place, end quote, and that the COVID risk to all Americans is at an historic high. Meanwhile, the CDC shortened its 14-day coronavirus quarantine guidance in an effort to boost compliance because Americans are bad at it. Instead of a 14-day quarantine, the CDC now recommends that potential exposure warrants a quarantine of 10 or 7 days, depending on a person's test results and symptoms. Those who lack symptoms may stop quarantining after 7 to 10 days with a negative COVID-19 test. Quote, reducing the length of quarantine may make it easier for people to take this critical public health action by reducing the economic hardship associated with a longer period, especially if they cannot work during that time, according to Dr. Henry Walk, the CDC's incident manager for its COVID-19 response. CDC officials also announced new guidance for traveling. If you're planning a trip, you should get tested 1 to 3 days before the trip and then tested again 3 to 5 days after returning. Back in D.C., White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows summoned FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn to the West Wing to explain why the agency hasn't approved the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine. Pfizer applied for emergency clearance on November 20th, and the FDA is scheduled to meet on December 10th to discuss the request for authorization. Before the meeting, Hahn said that his agency was balancing speed with making an appropriate decision. After the meeting, Hahn said the agency has, quote, all hands on deck, end quote, and is working day and night and on the weekends to evaluate and approve multiple coronavirus vaccines for emergency use authorization. And finally, Trump threatened to veto an annual defense bill authorizing nearly $1 trillion in military spending unless Congress repeals a federal law that gives online companies broad legal protections for the content posted on their platforms. The law, known as Section 230, is considered one of the Internet's foundational laws because it spares sites and services from being held accountable or liable for the content posted by their users. Trump has previously threatened to veto the same defense bill over his opposition to provisions that would rename military bases that honor Confederate commanders. Top Republicans and Democrats, however, plan to ignore Trump's demand. That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website. And as always, visit whatthefjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Amditas.